Like in the introduction, the constant comparison brought up would be Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which is also about colonialism, where you have Colonel Kurtz who travels to the heart of Africa to conquer the natives with his weapons. But so it's kind of the opposite with this one. This guy, Mustafa Saeed, travels to the heart of England to conquer the British women with his weapon. Better than food, man. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifton Leopold Sorensen. Hope you're all having a great morning. I'm getting it together over here. Seems like the whole world's coming apart. The hurricane hasn't hit yet. They haven't dropped the bomb. So, we're good for now. Time to read some books. Drink some coffee. Let that sit for a second. So, my friend and very generous patron Aisha sent me a box of books by Arab writers because I hadn't read any before. So, I picked, one with a cool cover. I mean, she sent me like a lot. She was very, very generous, and they're all kinds of different authors and different books. But I picked up this one, because I have an affinity for like New York Review of Books, classics. This one, Season of Migration to the North. A boring title, not a boring book. Written in the 60s by Tayeb Salih. I think I'm pronouncing that right-ish. So, I overflow this a lot. Usually I screw it up if I'm not paying attention, so I've never done it on camera before. I can feel the judgment the world over. There's a lot of books and stories that we're missing out on because of the translation factor from Arabic to English, as with any language. Sad to think about, but true. But it looks like this was a great place to start. This is apparently a very, very famous novel and widely respected. Tayeb Salih was a Sudanese writer who studied abroad in London and then worked in Paris for UNESCO. Though his novel became famous and it's translated into all these different languages and it's a big success, it was banned in Sudan for a period of time because of its graphic sexual descriptions. So, it's going to be good. Oh, don't die on me now. So it begins as a man's return to his village in Sudan after studying abroad and studying poetry in England for 7 years. Reconnecting with his grandfather and his friends and family, he meets this tall, dark, silent stranger in the village, this guy named Mustafa Saeed, who after getting drunk with the narrator at a party one night, begins to speak poetry in English. The narrator realizes that this guy has a great command of the English language. Not only that, but he also is memorizing poetry from England. So there's a lot that he's not getting from him. Of course, this shocks the narrator because he thought he was a hot shit from his journeys abroad. When he first meets this guy, Mustafa Saeed, he gives this interesting, lengthy description of him. And he said, I was aware of a strange combination of strength and weakness. He says that when he laughs, his weakness shows, and when he's quiet, his strength returns. He's hiding something. He's this kind of stoic figure, a man of very, very few words. But like I said, he's memorized English poetry, and it only comes out when he lets his guard down. So the story begins with this deceptive simplicity, a lot like the character Mustafa Saeed, who's just that's who the book's about, basically. The story begins with the descriptions of this village he returns to along the Nile, kind of happy and simplistic and sort of quaint and charming and sort of placid. Everything seems simple and unassuming, right? But of course you find out that it's not simple at all. It's all deeply, deeply complex. And all these people in the village, this small town, it's kind of like, I'm watching Twin Peaks right now. It's sort of like an Arabic Twin Peaks. It's sort of like an Arabic Twin Peaks, you know? Everybody's relationships are interwoven. They're all conflicting. And there's this tangled, bizarre web that only grows and grows, but it all starts with this Mustafa Saeed. He's the one who brings all this trouble upon the village. So you begin to realize that it's not simple at all. It seems simple, but the writing seems simple, but really it's just economical. It's all set up and placed perfectly, which I admire. I love the structure of this thing, bouncing back between the present and then flashbacks, throughout the novel, through like the Mustafa telling him what happened, but then also, being in the present with the narrator when he goes certain places and does certain things. You're switching back and forth between these voices, and it's great. In part, thematically, it's a novel about colonialism and those living in the transitional period between a country, between a now independent country and a country that was ruled previously. Like in the introduction, the constant comparison brought up would be Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which is also about colonialism, where you have Colonel Kurtz, who travels to the heart of Africa to conquer the natives with his weapons. So it's kind of the opposite with this one. This guy, Mustafa Saeed, travels to the heart of England to conquer the British women with his weapon. He seduces them by playing up to this exotic, preconceived image they have of him. And conquer he does, academically and romantically. He's this, he's kind of playing like this Sudanese Casanova, except he does it too well. And the women whose hearts he's broken begin killing themselves. Leading up to the final one, the final love affair, which is the opposite of his previous lovers. It's this woman who evades him for 3 years, and then she just marries him all of a sudden. And, she physically assaults him in the beginning, and she just like fights him, but then she kind of like lures him back in, and it's this really torrid relationship. They really seem to detest each other, like they really hate each other, but they keep like coming back. It's kind of like despicable. Finally, spoiler, it's not that much of a spoiler, he kills her. And then he kind of gets off in court unbelievably, and then he travels back to the small village where he eventually meets the narrator and tells him all of this. So he says, after the murder, he says, everything which happened before my meeting her was a premonition. Everything I did after I killed her was an apology, not for killing her, but for the lie that was my life. So again, Season of Migration to the North is told in the narrator's present journey and in flashbacks as Mustafa tells him this story. It reminds me a lot of the Argentinian author Ernesto Sabato's The Tunnel, which is about this man who's killed. You realize very, very quickly in the beginning he's killed his love obsession, and he's relating, how he reached that decision, how he decided to kill this person he was absolutely infatuated and obsessed with. Great premise, classic premise for a story. And that was written about 20 years or so before this one. I think that was in late 40s, 48. And this was 60s, late 60s, mid to late 60s. 1969, I think that was the English translation. I think it might have been, first published in 67. Okay, got that. Yeah, in Arabic. Right, so Mustafa Saeed returns to the small village next to the Nile, and he tells the narrator all of this stuff that happened. And then he disappears himself. He disappears. The narrator can't find him. Nobody can find him. There's a flood, and it's speculated he's either drowned, he's disappeared under the water, or he's killed himself somewhere. Nobody knows where he is. But, he leaves this house, he leaves his wife, and he leaves his 2 kids. And he puts the narrator in charge of them, or like kind of like a passive guardian. He just says, like, you're responsible now. Look, I trust you. Watch over them, which he does. The narrator actually takes on that responsibility and kind of passively checks in from time to time. But we never actually figure out what happened to Mustafa Saeed. He's just gone, as if he was a mirage or an illusion, which he's talking about all the time. I love it when I just discover things about the novel that I'm, presently while I'm doing the review, because it's this act of thinking and retelling the story, and it's like teaching. When you teach things, you internalize them and you understand them better yourself. You're teaching yourself at the same time as you're teaching other people. Not that I'm a great teacher, but so the narrator takes that responsibility. He watches over his family, and he gradually learns more about Mustafa Saeed because he becomes fascinated, of course. He becomes kind of like obsessed. He begins to see this mysterious, virulent egoism from beyond the grave that kind of just like infects everybody like a virus, right? Screaming to be remembered in this certain way, in this certain light, just begging to have you solve the mystery. But the narrator eventually just doesn't give it to him. He cuts the story short, he as kind of like this revenge. He doesn't let him finish. He doesn't give him what he desires. So just as fascinating as the story of Mustafa Saeed, which carries you through the whole book, are the inhabitants of the village, all these characters. Remember I said it's like the Twin Peaks, the Arabic Twin Peaks, this small fictional village along the Nile. You learn about all these townies, and they're great. They're really, really colorful characters. We spend a lot of time with the narrator's very old but charmingly spry grandfather and his friends, these total characters. And so you're sort of given this glimpse into Muslim life that I think is probably closer to the real deal in small places like this, much more so than the image we have over here in the West of how things go over there in Arabic countries day to day. It's not the common Western conception. I think it's probably a more accurate portrayal. And I think it goes without saying that this is valuable in a time of ideological, political, and social hostility, right? So in this case, Islam is not the center of their lives, right? They're not defined by it. It's a component, and some female characters are traditionally feminine and maternal and quiet and contained. And then another one, integral to the narrative, and my favorite character in the whole book, is a crass, hard-smoking, hard-drinking, tough old lady who behaves like one of the guys, and very, very much of the Bukowskian ilk. And getting drunk with her dirty old man friends. I mean, I love her. Bint Majoub. I think I'm butchering it. I don't give a fuck. Bint Majoub. Bint Majoub. However you say it. I don't know. I was gonna actually try and say good morning in Arabic for the beginning of the video because I'm cheesy as fuck like that, and I couldn't even pronounce it. I didn't even attempt. It was just like, I listened to it twice. I was like, nope, can't do it. So all the old folks are getting drunk one night, and in the narrator's grandfather's house, I think, and they're talking, and Bint Majoub's there. She's talking about her husbands, and they're all just like trading dirty stories and stuff, bragging, being braggadocious, or just crass, and so Bakri, who previously had been laughing without saying anything, said, "Tell us, Bint Majoub, which of your husbands was the best?" "Wad Bashir," said Bint Majoub promptly. "Wad Bashir, the dozy dope," said Bakri. "He was so slow, a goat could make off with his supper." "May I divorce," said Bint Majoub, freeing the ash from her cigarette onto the ground with a theatrical movement of her fingers. "If his thing wasn't like a wedge, he'd drive right into me, so I could hardly contain myself. He'd lift my legs after the evening prayer, and I'd remain splayed open till the call to prayers at dawn. When he had his climax, he'd shout like an ox being slaughtered. And always when moving from on top of me, he would say, 'Praise be to God, Bint Majoub.'" Oh, dirty old bird. So, there's a lot of descriptions, poetic descriptions of the landscape and the people and so on and so forth, and these kind of like existential crises that the narrator's having, and then this mysterious figure who's narrating back, his love crimes or whatever abroad. But then you just have like shit like this that just pops in out of nowhere. She's just like telling this old raunchy stories about her previous husbands, and I think that shit's great. I think it's very funny. Sure, we have these perceived like radical cultural differences and whatever, but I mean, this book is, people are people, man. You know, there's some things that just don't change no matter where you go, and I think this book is a shining example of that, and that's important. You got to keep that in mind. You know, and as far as the radical differences, you know, even the idea of female circumcision is brought up, and some characters defend it, you know, as kind of traditional, and then others just condemn it. They're like, you know, this is kind of barbaric and so antiquated. How can you even possibly defend it? You know, yeah, it's defended by some and abhorred by others, right? You're sometimes confronted with the poverty of these small communities in the desert, right? That's an inescapable element. It's certainly not a depiction of self-pity, but rather the examples are beautiful in that it portrays these people making do with what they have. You know, certain moments that we would just take for granted are suddenly kind of like big deals, you know, over there. Certain moments of pleasure or relaxation or just kind of tranquility, right? Two of my favorite scenes occur when the narrator is traveling to the city and they stop in the middle of the desert. This man comes up from, you know, out of nowhere and he's asking for a cigarette. He says he hasn't had a cigarette in 2 days, and the narrator gives him one. And he, you know, the description of him, you know, as he takes it and just sits back and smokes this thing, he's like drinking in the smoke. He just like lies back as if he's dead, I think is the description. And he's just, you can imagine this dude who's just been he doesn't even have a cigarette, you know, and he's out in the middle of the desert and he finally gets it and he just like savors every puff of nicotine that he can, and he just like splayed out. And I thought that was beautiful, you know. I thought that was great. And then later on in the same trip, this narrator takes part in this party, this impromptu, spontaneous celebration where all these folks in the desert just get together, like whoever's like driving, they just like pull over and they all just start having a party. And you know, the Bedouin, the desert people who you normally wouldn't see during the day, they come out from wherever they were, and somebody brings a goat and it's slaughtered, and they all pull up their cars and they all get in this. They pull their cars in a circle and they turn on the lights. So they, you know, you have this circle where everybody's dancing, lit by all these car headlights. And, you know, everybody's clapping and singing, and it's like nobody has anything but, you know, a little bit of food and some booze or whatever. But I mean, everybody's just having a hoedown. Well, actually, I don't know if they're drinking because Muslim culture and alcohol, but people are drinking throughout the book. So I don't know. Anyways, they call it a feast without meaning, you know, a mere desperate act that had sprung up impromptu, like the small whirlwinds that rise up in the desert and then die. You know, so everybody parties all night. And then at dawn, everybody leaves, and all that's left is just like, you know, sand. It's like nothing ever happened, right? I thought that was awesome. I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful scene. I kind of just like this testament to the mystery of memory, right? Like, where do all these things go? The sun is also a constant antagonist in his descriptions of traveling across the desert in this truck. There is no shelter from the sun, which rises up into the sky with unhurried steps, its rays spilling out on the ground as though there existed an old blood feud between it and the people of the earth. Yeah, right? Like, the harsh, extreme environment seems internalized by its inhabitants, right? You know, and it accentuates the simple moments of peace and comfortable existence in this village, or just in the desert in general, in this terrain. I mean, it's an extreme area. It's an extreme environment. You know, like every day, right? I can't like imagine living out in the middle of the desert. I mean, it was beautiful when I visited. It was just like I was always amazed that the Bedouin guys, the Berbers, were able to navigate in total darkness because, you know, all the dunes would shift, right? Because you have wind and sandstorms and all this shit. And so it's like, how do you know where you're going? We were like led out like from the camp tent. Like they would just like take us out around, just go walking through the dunes, and I'm like falling and shit and like just like falling down these dunes and, you know, it's like these guys are like totally fine, like no big deal. It's just like go in the darkness. They don't care. Uh, it was amazing. It was pretty cool. But maybe it just seemed that way. You know, I don't know. Yeah. The desert's beautiful. I mean, if you ever get the chance to go to any of them over there, I mean, in Africa, I mean, it's unlike anywhere else in the world. I mean, I've never seen, you know, stars like that. That's just something you have to see while you're existing on planet Earth, you know? It's profound. It's like profound doesn't even describe it. It's like otherworldly. Memory, identity, and these inescapable phantoms of the past that haunt those who are still living are the subjects of Season. How did we get here? Who are we truly? Where are we going? You know, and also just on an individual level. You know, like what is truth? Where is the truth? And you know, when you're confronted with your shortcomings, how do you overcome them? You know, how do you overcome your inability to act? Right? How do you overcome yourself? Not only do the ghosts of colonialism haunt the culture, but also, you know, the ghost of Mustafa Saeed is able to kill and torment from beyond the grave, it seems. You know, just because of his manipulation and this egotistical kind of trap he had set up, his legacy of pain and torment. It seems like everybody who comes into contact with him in the book is in one way or another affected negatively. Even though it's like he's not. It's tough to call him evil. It's just like he just has this. It doesn't seem like he's entirely evil, but he has this horrible effect on everybody, you know, like everybody he comes into contact with in some way is struck with tragedy in relation to him. So the book seems to say eventually we all have to confront who we are or die in the confusing process. Many times, not all the time, but many times we are given the choice. You can spend years, a decade, maybe even a lifetime thinking you know who you are, and then all of that can disappear. It can fall out from under you and you're lost, right? Your foundation disappears, a mirage, an illusion, as Mustafa says. We leave the narrator in the aftermath of this horrible tragedy in which the narrator is partially responsible for, along with Mustafa Saeed. The Nile River is mentioned many times in the book, and in the end, the narrator jumps in and tries to swim across it, but then he gets stuck in the middle. He's too tired to make it to the other side, but he's also too tired to swim back. So he's confronted with this decision we all face, right? Do you try to go on living, or do you just sink, right? Do you just sink to the bottom? And with that, I'll let you figure out what happens. It's great, better than food. It's an Arabic ghost story and an existential tragedy. It's awesome. I loved it. Short, sweet, beautiful. Thank you very much, Aisha. Definitely a good one for you guys who are a fan of Paul Bowles. And again, Ernesto Sabato. I keep coming back to that comparison. But Paul Bowles, if you liked The Sheltering Sky or The Delicate Prey, any of that stuff which takes place in North Africa, I would definitely check out Season of Migration to the North. Yeah. Hope everyone is doing very well. I'm going to start doing patron-only book reviews, which you can find at patreon.com/booksarebetterthanfood. If you'd be so kind as to donate an amount of your choice, would really help me out, keep the show going, and you would get access to those private reviews and my private vlog as well, where you can just hear about what's going on behind the scenes. Please subscribe to the show if you have not already. Please check out the book, especially if you've never read any Arab authors. Always remember, life is far too short to read bullshit. Get that coffee. Have a good one. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Ciao.